Kevin, if I was reading between the lines, I'd say you were less than fully supportive of the recent media guidelines that were published. You're sitting next to one of the key architects, so perhaps you can have a little conversation amongst yourselves.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. No, broadly, I would actually welcome them. I think I would commend the government and Alex in particular for his bravery, because it is a very difficult market, and that's beyond that one person that we mentioned. It is, as Marie has highlighted, just the complexity of the forces at play is sometimes it's just overwhelming. So I think there's a clarity, and from the initial position, I think it's some of the key elements are clear, but I would have some reservations in terms of how the process is done, and I think the key thing will be in terms of the quality of the decisions it will make, and I'm delighted that the advisory elements are strengthened. I think there's a case for strengthening the BAI as well, because it is operating in that very complex marketplace beyond where it has operated traditionally.
The person who we mentioned, I understand that might refer to Dennis O'Brien. Alex, you're probably sick and tired of answering questions about Dennis O'Brien. Can you just tell me what the latest is in respect of recent developments? He has issued a lawsuit against technically the Oireachtas, of which you are a member. Is that correct?
Well, I make a habit. I am a member of the Oireachtas, yes, I can answer that bit pretty clearly. But I do have to say, make a habit of not engaging in too much, or indeed any debate or discussion about any particular individual, particularly in the context of the media guidelines, media merger guidelines, for this reason: that laws and guidelines that go with them have general application. They are not measures or guidelines that are directed towards one individual or company. No matter how sort of obvious it may be in some people's minds that they are, that they or he or she is the institution that needs to be addressed. So, I also, and here I have to be, a bit careful, because Chatham House rules are no such thing anymore, since all of the technology came along that we're so familiar with and love so much. I have effectively, potentially a quasi-judicial function in terms of making a determination whether to be a future application, whether it's by that individual or any other individual. So I have to, I'm afraid, shy away from addressing issues about the individual. But can I just say about the media merger guidelines, I thought Kevin was very fair in his analysis and his assessment of the media merger guidelines. And we still have points at which we would disagree. But I thought his analysis was very fair from the perspective of the Irish Times, or indeed from just the general perspective of a practitioner in the media. I think that, for example, some of the points that he makes in relation to the specific operation of the guidelines, the question of including the BAI's role, or any of these, they can continue to be assessed. There's a provision in there that allows us to look at the operation of the guidelines and to improve them and tighten them up. And you were very fair in what you said as well in relation to the expertise. We did need to tighten up that issue of the expertise that would be available to the BAI in any assessment, particularly that related to print. But can I just say finally, in respect of the so-called retrospection point that Kevin did touch on. You mentioned Michael McDowell, and you can quote me on this. I think Michael was chancing his arm in that piece. And I'll tell you why, because he spoke not just as a former Taoiseach and Attorney General, but as a lawyer for whom I have enormous respect. And it just beggars belief that anybody would imagine that you could introduce a law that had the kind of retrospective effect that's being contended for, in circumstances where we have not just labyrinthine commercial issues that Kevin rightly referred to, but a written constitution with property rights that Michael and others have on many occasions, elevated to, from what I've seen people. I've never heard Michael before saying that property rights are not sacrosanct until we came to this issue. Because, of course, the problem is that it is not realistic to imagine that you can actually introduce a law and on foot of that law require people to divest themselves of assets which they acquired at a time when the law was not there. It's one thing to say, people mentioned the Ryanair case, and I think Michael mentioned it in his piece. The difference between this situation, and I hate being on the defensive about what I think are actually quite good media, but I want to deal with the point. The Ryanair case, where the British Competition Authority required Ryanair to divest themselves of shares, that's in respect of shares which they acquired in circumstances where it was unlawful to do so. The 2002 British Act the UK Act, Competition Act, or whatever its title is, of 2002, the shares were acquired after that law was enacted. So, it's one thing to say you could reorder the situation. Somebody has done something unlawful. A company has over-acquired shares, too many shares, too much concentration in breach of an existing law. But for a lawyer, or for anybody to say that it is not problematic to require any organisation, whether it's the one you mentioned or any, forcibly to divest themselves of assets which they acquired entirely lawfully at the time, I'm sorry, there is at the very least a significant constitutional obstacle involved here. And that's why I say Michael was chancing his arm in the piece.
Well, that's a very good headline for somebody tomorrow, should they choose to use. In fact, it may well be being headlined as we speak.